Hello, and welcome to another MarketMuse content strategy webinar in our series. I'm Jeff Coyle, the co-founder and chief strategy officer of MarketMuse, and today's discussion is going to be all about the words, the acronym, the letters that lots of people talk about in our world, and they are EEAT. We're going to define those things, get into what they mean, why they matter, and why 2024 is going to be critical for refining your processes and improving the way that you put content on web pages. In the importance of EEAT and leading with helpful content, I've got a great guest. But before I do, a little bit of housekeeping. Ask us anything. Ask us almost everything, anything. We're going to, if they're relevant to our discussion, we're going to answer them in line to the best we can. We'll also leave some time at the end to knock out anything in a lightning round that is additional or really specific or kind of weird. We love weird questions, though, so keep putting them in there. We'll have the replay for you via email in the next few days. Please like, share that, send it to your friends, send it to your company. And while you're at it, go check out our webinar recordings. We've got hundreds of them from amazing people. Sales enablement with Pam Didner, keyword research with Nick Eubanks, piles of amazing webinars on every possible topic related to content strategy you can imagine. We're also going to have some promos and some links at the end of this discussion to talk about. So stay for the entire thing and use those promos, and you'll be very, very happy about it. All right. The head of growth for Composely, Nicole McLean. Thank you for joining me today. Last time we were talking about this was connected to the idea that authenticity was the only thing that mattered. But when you're going to talking to teams about EEAT, first of all, how do you define that? How do you define that at Composely? How do you define that for yourself? How do you think about this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for having me back. Always love to collaborate with you in MarketMuse. Everyone welcome. Super excited to have this conversation. So just to level set, we have experience, expertise, authority, trustworthiness. I'll own and show some trustworthiness of some transparency and vulnerability that when I first heard about the additional EAT and the difference of expertise and experience, I actually thought experience meant on-page experience. Because I was like, why would it not? Like expertise and experience are the same thing. Like how could that possibly be different? So of course it's talking about on-page experience and all that. It's not, though I do recommend you think about your on-page experience is an important piece. I think understanding that experience and expertise is a critical part of like, why did Google add this additional E? And I think there is a difference. I spent 5 years in the HR space in marketing and partnerships. I have a lot of knowledge about it, studied it, etc. But I do not have firsthand experience delivering payroll, being in an HR role. And I think that is a difference when you read content of someone who just understands the books of it versus someone who has actually lived it. And figuring out a way to put both of those in your content is a great way to create that authority, to bring interesting ideas, to bring firsthand anecdotes, and ultimately build that trust with your audience. So it's definitely something that we're looking at, is how to bring more of that at scale, because it is hard to do at scale. If you're creating one piece of content a month, great, go find that SME, do that interview, create that really great piece of content. But if organic is a core part of your strategy, you need more than one piece a month to really fill the gap. And so I think we'll probably talk more about the ops and ways to do that. But I know internally, that's something we're thinking about, and we hear that a lot from our clients as well.
Nice. And so thank you for that. And I'm going to be digging into that. I just wanted to make sure, because we have an acronym in the name of the webinar, Jeff, best practice is let's make sure that everybody defines it. In my case, I think about it solely as expertise, experience, flip those because it's experience, expertise, right? Yep. Authoritativeness, and then trust. And I want to get into kind of the way that we think about that as it goes down. But before we do, tell us about how you got to Composely and what Composely does generally, so that people can kind of level set if they haven't seen some of our other recordings.
Yeah, super fast. I joined Composely, gosh, about a year and a half ago as our head of growth marketing. We were the classic cobbler's shoes. The cobbler's son has no shoes, so kind of
Mhm.
joined as our first head of marketing. Composely is a content writing company, so we spend a lot of time working with clients to fill that. We can help with the strategy, but if you have that, get great writers who have that experience, some who also have expertise, the firsthand credentials, etc., to come in and kind of fuel your content strategy.
Awesome. Well, that's fun. I love the cobbler's kids have no shoes reference.
Yeah.
Also, I just have to give you some credit as well, as I use the HR example all the time because my I said basically you might know everything about HR management software, and I used to run a website about HR software, literally.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I've never actually run a payroll using those
Exactly.
software. And you said that to me, about a year and a half ago. I think I've probably used that to death. You
Yeah.
probably heard that.
Yeah.
But that's a great example. It's also about, as many people know, I'm really into beer, have a brewery.
Yeah.
And I always say, like, I can tell when I read your review whether you drank that beer or not, right?
Right.
But
Yep.
only somebody who really is that expert could be the one who assesses that expertise and having that
Yep.
experience, right? And so that's where, and I was talking to Jared Krause on his podcast, which, if you're not familiar with them, Australian gentleman, great podcast, great website, and he's really into surfing. And I, on purpose, started saying vocabulary words wrong about surfboards on his podcast. And he was like, "Oh, I knew you were doing that just to get my goat." And I'm like, "Yeah." I
Yeah.
was like, "Yeah, man, how many skags you rocking on that way?" 'Cause I grew up in New Jersey. So, and he's like, "Yeah, nobody says that, Jeff." And I said, "Yeah, but that's the experience for someone who knows a lot about something and they're reading content that just doesn't look right." Like, I know if somebody's in the search space and how long they've been by reading their content. And then it gets to, or, like I mentioned, like certain other things. And, that's where your passion is shown on the page, right? So the challenge you have is when you're answering early stage awareness or basic things, how do you do that while still telling the story of expertise and while still communicating the experience? And what's Composely's approach on that? How do we take something that, could theoretically be a commodity? This could be tagged as commodity content. And I saw it even this
Yep.
morning. Hey, with SEO content, it can be generated and we don't have to worry about human in the loop. By the way, I don't prescribe to that. But how do you approach something when it might be something relatively simple, theoretically simple? How do you make it magic?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think part of what you said too is a lot of times marketers are not firsthand experts in the industry that they're marketing in. And I think that puts us in a really interesting position because I now have the experience of both. To point, I worked in HR, I worked in regulated water for government officials, very much not an expert in how to put water in the ground. I learned a lot. And then I come to Composely, where I have a decade of marketing experience and have run this, and now am a marketer at a company that does marketing. And that has really flipped, and that I am an SME while also leading a function. And not every marketer is in that position. So I think I have seen this as a trend from our clients, but finding that internal SME. And I think it is really important to identify who that is and build an internal culture around making sure you have access to that person. Because spoiler alert, it's probably your client success teams. Or your delivery teams, because you're hiring those experts to work with your clients. And so making sure that you can get access to them. Honestly, customer stories can be a great way to add magic to really simple things. Again, but if you're trying to define, like, let's do an article about what is EAT. If we're going to do a thing, it can be super simple, and you check the box to say, hey, Google, we've defined it. It's up top. Again, on-page experience is not in here, but answer the question early. Make sure you're kind of just delivering like what someone actually needs. And then you can go into adding other things, like maybe there's a clip from this webinar. Maybe I reach out to Jeff because I'm like, wow, Jeff talks about this all the time. Jeff, give me something interesting about EAT that's not normal. add that, further down in the article. So you're creating like a really interesting component. I leverage partners a lot. When I see topics, I'm like, oh, I was just talking to this person about that. Can they give me a quick quote? Or I know that they specialize in this. The issue is that takes time, and it takes someone who's really involved in it. And that is where, I know we're going to jump into AI because we already did in prep, but AI isn't going to know, oh, I have this relationship with this person, or this person I can reach out to, or I follow this like LinkedIn person. I'm going to include a screenshot of a post they made the other day that is related to, whether it's simple or complex, just to add something different to it and kind of make that content more unique. And so having that layer, I think, is important, because ultimately that's what people want to learn from people.
Well, I love the example of annotating a transcript. And I think it goes to, this isn't something that's an actual thing yet, or it's not a thing at this point, but it's that, does this query deserve experience? Every query deserves expertise, and that has become a standard. So the way I look at EEAT is actually in reverse. Right. I look at it as, and by the way, Cindy, hello, and thank you for coming today. And Michael, no, we have no slides today, but guess what? We got plenty of slides on EEAT we can share with you, and maybe we'll send out a few decks. But today we're going to be getting into some specifics and use cases here. But great questions. The T is about, we should be showing websites from providers we trust. How do we assess that? That becomes the core, right? That's that center of that Venn diagram. Then it's, how do we measure if somebody has authoritativeness, which, if you're an SEO pedant, like I sometimes have been called, it's authoritativeness. And we can calculate that at the site or site section level for topics. The best ways to do that are a combination of links, because I know if you're coming here and you're saying, oh, Jeff's just going to talk about content. No. I'm talking about links. Authoritativeness is about your link structure. It's about what the world's saying about you, whether you are relevant to this topic, and if you followed through with content. So I'm going back. Do I trust this source? How do I assess that trust? All different ways. Now, authoritativeness, right? Do I have authoritativeness? Then do I follow through with expertise? Do I have the right breadth and depth of coverage? When I write about this, am I exhibiting expertise? Now the question is, does this deserve expertise? So I think a process for you as a website owner or agency owner is to understand, does my client have any trusted, are they a trusted source? Do they have authority on any topics? Where are they exhibiting expertise? And maybe where have they gotten by on low quality content?
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's not enough anymore, because, the reviews world is running into this right now. They got hit by a big bus 6 times. And I feel bad if somebody's in the reviews world and they weren't exhibiting real experience. I always use an example of a top 6 best rated beers article. I use this in a lot of my presentations, and I'm like, the person who wrote this didn't actually drink any of these beers. And someone was like, how do you know that? I'm like, well, number 2 hasn't been produced since 2008. Right.
That's a pretty clear sign.
Clear one. Yeah. But also, here's some other reasons, right? So
right.
And why I asked that question, why I say that way, is because don't you have a situation where you could be asked to write content for a website and they buy 1,000 articles from you, right? Mm-hmm. And you're going to produce the best stuff in the world, but they've got existing content on their site that has those mistakes in it. And thus they're dead, aren't they? Don't you have to fix it?
Yeah. No, 100%. And that is honestly, our conversations have really shifted to, we want to go produce a bunch of new content, to, I can't keep investing with limited resources, both time, people, and financially, on content if I have an anchor around my site from past content that's not working. And so we're seeing a lot of people kind of lean into this auditing, which MarketMuse is a great tool if you need that. make, to go look at that quickly and get a good sense of, because it does take a decision point to say, does this need to be rewritten completely from scratch? Does it need to be deleted off of our site? Does it need to be just slightly tweaked, adding in maybe some of that quote unquote magic, like, oh, we're going to go grab a clip from the webinar. We're going to add an infographic. We're going to add a firsthand anecdote from someone, those types of things, and figuring out kind of which you need to do. Sometimes it's even combining. Oh, we have really similar content. It's cannibalizing it. Like, it takes time to really go into that. But, we ran into this earlier this year, previous service of speech writing. We are a writing company. We write lots of different things. And some of our best performing content was like how to write a eulogy, how to give a best man speech, etc. But we haven't really done that service in years. It's not, it just happened to be an article that ranked really well, but is not the core of what we do. However, when we really were diving into things and doing a deep audit, I think Google was like, oh, you have so much experience and expertise about speech writing. Like, you're speech writers. It's like, no, we're more, but like maybe 1% of our clients are for speech writing. We actually have a lot of expertise and authority in other things that are not speech writing. And so, we had to make some decisions about what we wanted to do with that content, because I think it was actually giving the wrong signals. Even though we probably did have eat in that topic, it's not the topic we want eat in. So to the point, if a client comes to us and says like, hey, go write this, there is some times where we have to have those conversations of like, you may not actually achieve what you're trying to achieve here.
Yep. I mean, I've had that happen, and 90% of your website traffic goes to a page, and you don't love it. You don't love that page. That happens all the time. I mean, and I have extreme examples. Yours is I'd say a level 2. I've had an extreme.
Yeah, it's still tangential to what we do, but yeah, I'm sure.
Translation companies, 80% of their traffic was going to a page about how to say expletives in foreign languages, right? Things like that are wacko bananas, but they happen. They're there. But yours may be a little bit different, right? Your pages may actually be able to be morphed into an appropriate cluster, into a collection of content where it would be okay for you to answer that question. But that page shouldn't live out there in left field and exist without being part of an organism that is around a marketing journey, right? And so I love that.
And it kind of goes back to like brand. Like, if you don't have a strong brand, or you don't have a clear perspective of who you are,
right?
Google's is gonna assign you something, just like your audience is going to assign you something.
Sure.
And so if you're not being thoughtful about what that is, and this is where content is such a holistic approach, you can't game good content. We talk a lot about organic because SEO is such a great, if you can crack the code, especially when economy is uncertain and there's a lot of ups and downs and your budget's getting slashed, like, it is an owned channel. And if you can keep that, it is so lucrative and a great thing to kind of lean on in hard times. But it takes a dedicated effort to get there. And it's not just organic. You have to have, all the technical stuff that goes into it, which, shocker, doesn't just help organic. It helps anyone coming to your site and experiencing what's going on. Your social, are you getting good links back? Are you putting out content that other people want to link to? All of it is, it's a lot. And for any small teams that are doing this, like, I see you, Jeff, and I see you. You're doing a great job. It is hard.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things that I'll mention is I got a text or a DM on the X Twitter that said, Nicole's talking about experience in 2 different ways. Does she mean user experience and then experience like a Google experience? And I'm like, yes, that's what she means. But I want to make sure that that's clear. So yes, creating a great user experience on your site. Let's say you have an intrusive ad. Let's say you're not getting to the point with the content. you're promising something up top and not delivering it by the bottom is a key aspect of AI generated content. It's a big failing because you're looking at probabilities. You're creating content with probabilities and making sure your point of view communicates. And if you promise it in line A, you deliver it by line X, right? That's a big key here. So content quality, also user experience has a big piece of that. Watching for wishy-washy stuff. Like if you say, I'm going to tell you the best way to, choose the best golden ale. And then by the end, you're like, anyone can choose any golden ale. And then you're like, wait, what? You didn't tell me the best anything, right? You didn't do anything. You didn't provide any unique repeatable value.
And there are ways that you can help call out some of your authoritativeness, or we've seen some people who have that SME in-house, and so they're starting every article with like hot take or hot tip from our in-house SME, and that's called out in a really specific way, or using good call outs throughout to draw your eye to those most important things, or to say like, this is really what you care about and I'm calling it out big and bold. And if you need more, go on. Like there are also just some things that can enhance the experience. And then also some things Jeff mentioned that like really deter from it and are just bad.
Oh, but I love that example. And I love that example of like, why am I the one writing this article needs to come through in the narrative, right? And why am I writing this article? If the answer is you could have been plugged in for anyone, well, we've got to come over the top with something else, right? I mean, so it's getting into that because you're not checking the boxes, right? So, I mean, I would like to think about this as simplified. I love the example of EEAT because one of the examples I use is, what does this acronym mean? Well, I could just write the 4 things and moving on, right? Or what are the other pieces that would add value for a reader? It's really putting yourself in their shoes, right? Is that searcher intent or wayfinding intent, navigational intent to this page? And they get here and they're like, oh, I need to immediately know why they're writing this and why what they're providing is truly a unique experience, right? And so, I mean, I have sometimes in my room, in my office here, you can hear snoring. I have a Boston Terrier. Sometimes he's around and he's snoring in my room. He has macular degeneration, so he's nearly blind, right? He is crazy and smelly like every Boston Terrier is, right? So if I write an article about, Boston Terrier health issues, and I don't include the fact that Orval has macular degeneration, allergy issues, and have pictures of Orv there, why would you trust me? Why would you trust me? The answer to that question is if I were a veterinarian.
Yeah.
That's the only other reason why you would trust me with that information, right? Or where I act as a journalist and I tell my story, my personal story, and I also tell my story interacting with veterinarians. Because that's what journalists do, right? So where they actually are saying, I am not an expert on beer, but I love beer and I drank these beers. Yeah. And as part of
here's Jeff.
As part of this, I talked to Jeff Coyle and he told me how they make this freaking beer. And and I also talked to this other guy. He's a beer judge, right? And I act as a true journalist. So the place for you is to either act as a real journalist or be the expert or live with mediocre performance, isn't it?
Yeah, well, so that was going to be one of my questions to you is, what are your thoughts on the necessity of authorship and author pages, and kind of being transparent in how an article was created? I'm turning it around. I'm asking
turning around on me. What are my thoughts? Oh gosh, my thoughts are well documented in massive Twitter wars for 15 years. All right, but anyway, one of the most sleepless nights I had was about authorship on the Twitter about 10 years ago.
That's hilarious.
But those days. But no, Google wants authorship to work. They've tried 4 times. It didn't work 3 times. Just didn't. right? But their goal is that it works. Why? Why? Because they have this acronym, and they're going from right to left, and it helps them know what to provide if this is done well. It has just not been done well or not. So all the pundits who will go out and say that it's not about this, it's not that I see articles that have authors and I see authors that haven't, right? There's no downside in you showing an audit trail on your content. There's no downside. It may not make your page magically, bubble up to number one. There is no business downside unless you're cheating, unless you're not authentic, right? So it's a catch-22, right? It may not be the thing that escalates you to, bounds you into number one today. However, it not doing it could potentially illustrate inauthenticity. And one, in my professionally experienced opinion, one faked authentic experience will be the hammer Google has to drop in the future. If they can see that you're faking authenticity, especially if your outcome is terrible content too, and you're also faking that authenticity, the hammer's coming. I mean, it might have already come. I've watched it come on thousands and thousands of websites and dozens of people who have said, "Oh man, I relied on X tool, and I shouldn't have," or "I listened to X guru, and I shouldn't have." Jeff, can you fix this? And that's that's my story for another day. But no, so that's my take on it. I think, what's the downside if you're really awesome, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. We work with a lot of publishers, and so it's a slightly different space. Like their trustworthiness is everything. Going to that type of Healthline, I think, does this really well. Of clearly documenting dates, updated by, updated on, and then links to those people's bios, bylines on different sites, as well as they have an entire page dedicated to explaining their editorial process. And I think that's great. Why not share your perspective on it, how you go about creating content, even if you're not a publisher? I mean, that is so critical when you are a digital publisher and that's what you need. But even if you're a small company, giving that, is that page going to rank? No. Is that page a considerable factor into whether or not Google's going to rank you? Again, we don't know. But if you have people who want to understand you more, what a great way to build that connection with your audience, as giving them insight into how you go about educating.
And that works real well until you put, Dr. Jeff Coyle on your site and say that he medically reviewed this, because guess what? You don't want me medically reviewing anything. And so you do have to watch for that. And Healthline's a great example of a site that took advantage of their authority early and weathered the storm of bad choices with content. So they made bad choices with content where they had content that would, propose the value of answering a question, but it actually was a massive thing that covered 16 different intents and didn't actually get around to solving the problem. Cleaning that up while also showing and exhibiting expertise, it was key to them. And then, recognizing that they shouldn't always have all the intents covered on one page was a smart move. And their agency that they work with is one of the best in the world. So I give lots of kudos to the way that they've evolved. I still feel like there's room to grow there, but I love that they're setting a great example with an audit trail, and I think that that's where the future's going. And if you haven't looked at that, there's some really great examples. I'm gonna before we get in though, I want to let's get your take on that first. Okay.
Well, I was going to say, changing a little bit. I've definitely had conversations with clients, even just other marketers, about EAT and ghostwriting. Especially if you think about books. I was just talking to a marketer through Pavilion who's like, we're looking at writing a book for our CEO. Did you get a ghostwriter? It's a pretty common practice. And I think that's kind of what we used to see even in our industry is like, hey, you have ghostwriters. Like we can put our company head on it, right? Like we can say we wrote it. It's like yeah, like that's a common practice. But does that have eat? Is that authentic? I guess like, like authentic's not an eat, but can you have authentic, genuine content if you use a ghostwriter? And I think it just depends on how involved that person is. Like there are some people who have incredible expertise, or we have a lot of clients that come to us to say, like, we know what we're talking about. We're great financial analysts. We're great financial advisors. We're not writers because we're number people, but like writing is not our skill set. And so I think as long as that person's heavily involved in the process, I think it's okay to still have ghostwriting as part of your process, as long as you're not, to point making up that, oh, we did have a doctor write this when we actually didn't, or those types of things. But it is an interesting dynamic of trying to create content if you're not the one actually writing it, or you're not putting the person who wrote it as the author behind it, and then also not reviewing the content or not making sure that it's accurate before just publishing it.
Well, that's a good segue to what my question was going to be.
Great. We're on the same page.
We are on the same page. You use the word ghostwriter. That's first thing.
Yeah.
I feel ghostwriters have to be journalists right now. You have to be a great writer as well as have great use of resources. You can't just write and get approval. You're going to struggle with it. But having a human,
I agree with that. I think writers are being asked to be
editors.
I think they're being asked to do a lot more than they ever used to be. I think they're expected to be able to edit. And I don't think people really understand the different skill sets between writing and editing. Even within editing, there are like 5 types of editing. Not all are created equal and not all have the same skill set. But then also interviewing and knowing how to have a one-to-one relationship, how to dig in, how to have empathy in order to create space to get stories, and again, for a simple topic, like what is a pineapple? You don't necessarily need to have this, like, that's what all the recipe sites do that we hate, I was born on a pineapple
we'll get
plantation.
into that if you want.
I think we all know that. But when you're trying to create really meaty content, someone who can write is not necessarily great at interviewing.
Right.
And then analyzing that. And so I do think we're starting to ask writers to really up level in the fact that we need them to do multiple things, or we're not willing to pay, whether it's an internal hire, it's an external resource that you're wanting to find someone who can do all those things is a premium.
Yeah, I know you nailed it. And we are asking writers to be editors, and we're asking editors to be writers. We're asking all of them to be journalists, and they're not. It's like asking, I always say, it's like asking you say, oh, this was a great meal. Do you farm? To your chef, right? And that's tough.
That's a great example. Yeah, that's a great example.
And that is, it's very hard. So I think you got to make sure you don't do that. You got to make sure that the person's comfortable with it, because like you also said, the journey of editing, and it's the developmental editing, copy editing, proofreading. These are different skills. And if you think editing is simple, I'm real sorry for you. And that's why your content is probably having problems. You're not going through a proper editorial process. I've learned
because honestly, to point optimizations, when we work with clients on optimizations, it takes twice as long. It is harder to optimize than it is just to start from scratch, where you get to build the narrative and control everything. Because if you have existing content, especially something that is already performing decently well, you have to be so careful what you change and what you don't, because you don't necessarily know what's working. And so that editing and that knowledge and skill set is so important.
Yep. Yeah. No, I mean, it's really good point. I'm going to take it back to a point that you had made about Can a article not written by the expert exhibit
Yeah.
expertise? That was
Yeah.
the question. And I'm going to drive it back to, can AI be involved in these processes, right?
I was waiting for you to get there. I didn't want to take it there because that's what everything is talked about nowadays is let's talk about AI. But it is an important piece to
Yeah.
this conversation.
So the question would be, let's say you're calling them ghostwriter. I'm going to call it writer. I'm going to call it writing resource that I paid for that's a human. I'm going to talk, that could be an AI resource. And first question would be using artificial intelligence at all stages of the content lifecycle. How do you think about that? Then I've got a tougher question.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, I think there are some people who have really taken the time to learn how to prompt tools effectively. And therefore, I think also understand the risks of using tools like this. Ultimately, where I think for the general population, AI is a great tool, but it's not quite at the point where you should just hang your hat on letting it generate all of your content, whether that's a blog article, an email, an ad copy, like anything. It's just normally not as good, or it's pretty obvious that it was written by AI. But it can be a huge time saver. And you should take time and you should test and you should make it part of your how you run your team to figure out new and interesting ways to leverage AI so that you can get time back to do all of the things that Jeff and I have just been talking about, to add that magic, to go work with an SME, to get that interview and then use AI to summarize it, give you some interesting points, transcribe it, and then you're still putting the final piece together. I think it can touch almost all. I think it's fine even if your first draft comes from AI, but if you're letting things go live without clear human involvement, probably editing with someone who actually understands the goal of the piece, who understands the intent of the keyword, adding in and source checking everything, you're putting a lot of risk into your content strategy that once you lose it, to your point, Jeff, it's really hard to get it back.
Really hard to get it back. And we're seeing that every day. I mean, sports publications, media publications. Oftentimes folks are thinking that it's either yay or nay, right? I use artificial, and I'm not a great writer, and I'm very open and honest about that. I'm all over the place. It's really hard for me to get stuff down onto paper in a proper format. And I use it for structuring. I use it for narrative structuring. For sure. I use it for storytelling assistance, and also to just get all my stuff organized. And that can be a way of being superhuman and using that power.
Absolutely.
However, I will challenge two things.
Please.
Right. And I take lots of notes as we go. And one is, AI isn't going to know you have that relationship. You said that before when you're talking about you have a relationship with another company or a vendor or a person in that experience. I'm going to say there are technologies already, and those types of relationships, those types of real sets of data could exist. It's just the AI you have access to and that you bought off the street for $20 don't have that experience, right? And so I would say I think that's where the smushing together of the word AI with the publicly available ChatGPT has made it so that the world isn't dreaming about what they can do with AI. They're believing that is what they can do with AI.
That is AI.
How do you
I think that's a
that?
fair point, that it can. AI, it's like Kleenex and tissues. That is how ChatGPT and AI, and there are so many AI tools that are not ChatGPT. Right. I think we're starting to move away from that a little bit, but It is a fair point. But I do think that there is some things like I get coffee or I do a 20-minute catch up with a partner or even just a business colleague, and we're talking
Right.
about things and I'm genuinely understanding like their challenges or an initiative they're working on for Q1, and I'm like, hey, I'm writing this article, or I not even content related, I'm working on this webinar, I'm trying to accomplish this too, could we team up and make a little 1+1 = 3 action, or 1+1 = ½ because I'm getting to leverage some of your resources to
Sure.
accomplish something I'd have to do by myself.
Mhm.
That is the piece that I think is going to be a lot harder for AI to supplement.
Yep.
And it's like just being that natural person. Now, granted, I also lead partnerships at Composely. I've been a partnership person in my past. So I'm a big proponent of what partnerships can do for especially small companies and finding those but it has to be a win-win. And I think that is where AI, if you have to give AI the data to know like, hey, this person that I'm friends with across the country is trying to accomplish this thing, I can help them do that by actually also doing something I need, which is include a quote that gives them a link back to a new service page that I know they're working on. And wow, what a wonderful thing. So that's more of what I meant by that.
Yeah.
But there is
That's what I thought.
probably, so like, I do think it's a fair distinction though, that like ChatGPT is not AI. There are other tools that can do things beyond ChatGPT,
Yeah.
which is amazing. But I don't know. I'm going to stand my ground a little bit of like, I don't know if those human relationships can fully be supplanted yet.
I don't think they can be supplanted, but they can. You can step your way through them, right? So the human in the loop components that matter for your business need to be non-negotiable. That's my point.
Mm-hmm.
It's if you use these things, you need to create a policy internally so that you say no. Hey, Nicole, go write me an article about recycling aluminum cans, and you say no, I'm not gonna until you give me your point of view, why your company is an expert on this, where it's coming from,
Yeah.
because I need
Yeah.
to work that stuff into this article or it's gonna stink. Or you need to give me the money so that I can interview Steven, who works at Alcoa, and he's been recycling cans for 20 years. One of those two things has to happen, or I'm not writing the article.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, that's right. So I think that you nailed it with that. So I think that those things are cool. Okay, cool. And speaking of that, great dovetail for Sean, and awesome question. At an agency scale, how can we enact EEAT for our clients when we may be given very or little or no information with which to work for on a monthly basis? What are some strategies for scaling quality copy across a base of writers? So Sean, I honestly did not even plan that. But how would you go about doing that? And I think it's, anytime you're using AI, making sure you have data sets if you're going to use them, or you're consciously going to take developmental editing like steps to put that stuff in. You gave a great example. I'd love to know more about yours with Hot Take from Joey, because he builds houses, and that's the one example, right? But what are some other ways that an agency can make this happen at scale? Then we'll get into content operations at scale, which
right.
Yeah, I know, tough question. Great question.
So it's a good question. I mean, I think the operations come into it because it's the scale piece. I think one, finding better writers with actual either experience and expertise, or at least expertise in the subject, can help, because again, they're going to just do better research and they're going to be able to kind of better filter, like this is actually real, this isn't, because they have expertise, which kind of gets into another question down here of like, well, what if your authors aren't experts in a thing? That would be one thing I'd recommend, is find authors who are, so you can kind of lean on that as like the foundation you can trust is going to be really good. Then if you have the time and you can build it in, SME review. I feel like SME review is going to be a bigger thing in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yep.
It already has been a fairly staple in medical because of the level of regulation. A little bit in more like YMYL, like legal finance, but to point like marketers, I don't really see marketers SME review by other marketers. But why not? Because honestly, it's easier to find great marketers than it is to find a pediatric neurologist who is like, I'm out saving the children. Yes, let me review your article. You know, it's at like at some of these other industries, I think it's actually easier to find that. So adding that as part of your workflow is something that could be interesting. Again, that's an editing step. That's not necessarily a writing step, but that is a type of editing. And then at scale, I mean, this is where who is the SME you're working with? Like if the client isn't going to give you great briefs or great direction, you know, can they connect you with someone internally that's an SME? And especially if you're an agency, do you have the time to go do 2 interviews a month with your SME and pull all of that? Oh my gosh. The reactions are still a thing. If anyone else feels the pain of these random reactions that now happen, as someone who talks with their hands, they just show up all the time. Can you start with interviewing someone for an hour a month and use that to inform the content? Again, I think it's how much can you get from the jump, that trustworthiness. Again, I agree with Jeff. It goes backwards. Like, who are the people you can trust to give you the authority, the expertise, and the experience? And sometimes that can be your author, and that's a decent foundational starting point. Sometimes you need to go find that information first.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that the making sure that if you are interacting with AI, you're bringing something to the table, your point of view. It can be as simple as a point of view. It can be some areas of expertise. It can be Joey's hot take because he builds houses, right? And because that's relevant. But figure that out. You don't want to maybe go as far as the 3,000 words before you get to the most simple chocolate chip cookie recipe. Although, by the way, I play the don't on that argument. I actually do believe you need to weave in personal narrative into your recipes. I know. I'm very.
No, I actually think that's great, but don't make me scroll before, or don't give me some option to get to what I'm looking for.
That's a user experience discussion. I agree. But guess what? I need to know why your chocolate chip cookie recipe is the best one on the web, because there's like 6,000 of them. I mean, it's the most obvious example. And that's why I think there's a fun little paradox.
So I think that's a really good point, though. Like, just because you add narrative doesn't mean it's relevant.
Yes.
So if you're writing a blog about, you know, how you wanted to make beer at home and how you've evaluated all these kits and here's the best homemade beer making kit or whatever. Yeah, I want to know the narrative of like how you went about that. How do you even know like what criteria to use because you've grown? But like if you start out and being like, you know, it all started when my grandfather gave me my first beer in a date that I won't even say.
Yeah, right.
You know, like I want to know like, okay, cool. But like, don't give me 3 paragraphs about that. That's not relevant to what I'm trying to understand in this article.
But it's how much experience do you need to trust me? Right.
That's a great question.
Do you have that experience with me already? Like, you know, if it's, you know, Mitch Steele. Mitch Steele is a word to me. That's like a celebrity, right? He's like superstar, right? If you don't know who Mitch Steele is, then the fact that Mitch Steele is the tagline when you go read this article about beer, it's irrelevant. So does he need to set the table of who he is and why he's important? And can he do that with a personal narrative? Is he a great storyteller, right? Or is it nonsensical in its nature? Right. Is it not telling that story? And so I think you have to have a purpose.
I think it goes back to what you said previously of like, do you need to know that I drink a lot of beer or that I understand how beer is made and I have experience? Like those are 2 different levels of experience.
Yeah.
That's you know, awesome. Like, oh, I've drank a lot of beer, so here's why you should trust my thing. But like I've studied it and I understand those. Like there is a difference in the narrative and whether or not the narrative is, I love that question you asked. Is the narrative and the examples I'm giving actually giving you enough trust to know that you should read this article? Or is it just nonsensical and I'm trying to fill words and hit a word count because the best competing article, who's currently ranking number one, has a certain word count and I'm just trying to get there?
Yep. And I use this example quite frequently, and I'll bend it a little bit for you because of the example you gave. If I went and threw up a blog on MarketMuse about how to pick the right first home brewing kit for yourself, and I didn't give anyone any context, right? The internet might have some context because of links, but you landing there, you're like, why the heck should I trust Jeff Coyle? Isn't he the guy from MarketMuse, right? There's no context there. I mean, that's the example. You're playing that out every time you put pen to paper. Great question. Okay, Ulf, awesome name. Ulf also reminds me of Ulf Samuelson, who played for the Rangers, and he put some nasty hits on people. Was a very disliked defenseman. But sorry if I'm from New Jersey. Sorry if I missed this, but relating the subject of ghostwriting, how should websites with fake authors approach authorship on their blogs? Awesome question. And I'm going to send you his follow up. Don't fake it. Use real authors. Not a great answer. I agree. We wouldn't have said that. But if the point of EEAT is to demonstrate your authority and experience, then what do you do if your authors aren't experts on the subject? I feel like this is the case for the majority of content people create on the internet, especially in the niche blogging world. It gets tricky. I completely agree and have lots to say on this, and it's an awesome question. Thank you, Ulf. Nicole, how do you address these nichers or nichers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what we said at the beginning and like my personal experience of I am a marketer. I go work for a company that specializes in the lead and copper rule of water management. And I was like, I don't know what any of this means.
Right.
But I have to run marketing, and the people who are experts are out there actually testing water and are not, to your point, Jeff, like writers by trade. They're chemical engineers, etc. Like that you have to find this overlap. And I think that is where content operations come in, is putting it in to say, okay, you can have a really great writer, but how are you giving them the expertise? Maybe it's an SME interview. Maybe they have to go get certifications and they need to go educate themselves to have that expertise. Again, they're not going to have that firsthand experience, but you should be making sure that if your writers don't come from that background or don't, we were just talking to someone that needs like a expert in glazing for interior design and manufacturing. Very niche. You can educate yourself about that so you understand it, but you may not have that firsthand expertise, that firsthand experience. So I would encourage you to make sure your authors are educating themselves ongoing to become experts in that topic. But again, to get that firsthand experience, like do those interviews or do it on the before or after. Do it in the front hand and let it inform the article, or create the article and then get someone to review it and make sure that it's accurate and add in any anecdotes or add in any narrative and then add them as an editor. So you have written by this person, but edited by the expert.
I love the answer. It's not a go get good authors and go get smart writers, right? It's a little bit of
you can do that, but if you have those people in house, like you don't want to fire them. Like that's not a realistic answer for you.
I want, Jeff is a great, I'm saying this, I don't want to say somebody's random name. Nicole is a great writer. She can write about cats or coffee. She's just a great writer, right? I want to be able to use that resource well, right? And a lot of people have a lot of editorial debt. I run into this all the time. I have 1,000 articles and none of them were written by anyone that's an expert. What do I do, right? And it is a painful situation. It's one I'm running into all the time, and oftentimes they were optimizing stuff with over optimization solutions, and picking content to write for the wrong reasons. They were long tailing when they shouldn't have been. There's a lot of. I'll leave that there for now. But
over optimization is a whole other topic.
But
I know we only have 6 minutes, but
layering on. You have to put the best end product out the door at the end of the day, right? And so you've got to get that page to a place where you want to stand by it, where your brand wants to stand by it, where someone at your company is standing by it. You will have to touch that article if it isn't great, right? Let's just say you say, no, 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 it is great already. It's just it was written by admin or like black box or third party, but it is great, right? You do have to figure out a situation where you're communicating the way this was created and you're standing by that process. And that's basically, you are being judged. You're being judged by every user that goes to the site. You're being judged by the software that's evaluating your site. So how do you evaluate authors? You can stand by that and say, here's how our process works. We have a collection of editors and we publish these as the voice of our brand. The voice of our brand is cool dog toys, and we're cool dog toys. And we make sure all our editors actually have dogs, and they play with the dog toys. So we know that is cool. We don't put their names on it because that's not the goal of this. We are, we're representing the brand that we are. You got to get into that detail. Maybe that's not going to be enough, right? Maybe you will have to have some additional layers, but you got to go down that road and figure out when does the query deserve experience, and is this enough for your space? And that's going to be real hard. And so, people are doing this, Kevin, all this time. I'm going to give you an example from Nicole's previous discussion as we run out of time, and I'm starting to talk fast. She said, how to give a best man speech. Awesome example. You know why? Because there's actually an exception to topic modeling that I use for best man speeches, right? How to give a best man speech. The person who is an expert on that is an expert in speech writing and public speaking, right? Great best man speech topics. Does that deserve expertise? Does that deserve experience? It's very situational, and it's a list of disparate topics and concepts, right? So Google has a hard time with number 2. They have a hard time with lists of disparate topics. They almost have to throw the content out and rely solely on links, because who's to say that your list is good, right?
Right.
So you think about that listicle that how do you provide unique and differentiated value? So you got to really think about this from a page by page specific, understand what value would mean. Okay. And as we're running out of time, rapid firing and some awesome, super duper questions. And Mark, thank you. Carrie Ann, as a Caribbean food blogger, I love Caribbean food. I am to create content that resonates with my audience palette. Provide insights on how to effectively balance personal experience and culinary experience, and using AI throughout that process. What a great example to end on. And I'm just going to let you go. And I have some great ideas here too.
Oh gosh.
Caribbean.
By the way, I mean, I think this goes into...
My coffee cup is all the flags of the Caribbean, and it is old and beaten up. So there you go. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I think this goes into... I want to ask a follow-up question of, if you're a Caribbean food blogger and aim to create content that resonates with my audience's palate, wouldn't they also care about Caribbean? So I feel like sharing your unique experiences just resonates, unless you're writing to people and you're trying to convince them that Caribbean is an approachable food that you could create yourself, or to use those recipes. Like, I do think there's some intent there. I want to better understand. But I think it goes back to what we said of, like, we want to understand your experiences and how you are an expert at Caribbean food, and therefore why someone should take action on those articles, whether it's a recipe, it's which Caribbean restaurants in certain cities to go look at. Again, I think to your point, Jeff, like, the intent behind the content you're creating plays into a little bit of how I would leverage your experience. But from the AI perspective, I mean, I think you can use AI Jeff and I have had this conversation of whether or not to use AI for topic ideation, because I feel like everyone's like, oh, just use it for topic ideation. It's a great way to come up with ideas, but that can be like where the genius happens is in that topic and how you want to do it. So again, we only have like 30 seconds. So
that's okay. We can go there.
That's
it's good.
That's a whole thing of, again, like, do you use AI at the jump, or do you put a lot of your human resources at the jump and then use AI throughout the life cycle, like you said, Jeff, to help with structure, or to, give it the initial ideas and let it expand on it and kind of put it at where you need, and then you go back in and update it. I'm curious. I'm now
Awesome
blanking a
question.
little bit on what you said of topic ideation and why you're like, I wouldn't use it for topic ideation.
If it's replacing sort descend by search volume, then inject it in. But make sure you have you're bringing some of your personal narrative. So I mean, as somebody who is thinking about, and I've done a lot of work on food blogs, as you know, as people know,
Yeah.
You have so many things you can bring. And so for you, it's, do I want to inspire cultural exploration? Do I want to inspire education? Do I want to describe why my take on recipe development is unique? Do I want to talk about local ingredients and sustainability? Am I focused on health and nutrition from that point of view? Do I include travel? How do I integrate interactive media, seasonal, festive things that might connect me, my community, pairings, dietary constraints? You should ask a question before you start writing anything about, do I have a point of view on this and how does it fit into that list? And if you don't have a point of view on this, get one. Because that's what's going to matter. Get a point of view on this before you start writing. And that's what comes through. It really does. But Nicole, we're over time. This has been a great conversation. We've got extra questions. We may shoot you some emails if we haven't gotten to it. But it's really, really been fun. I think we got a lot of the action items. I've got a bunch of stuff happening on Twitter DMs that we got to, thankfully. A lot of thank yous. And really, really thank you, Nicole, for the extra time. And we appreciate you and really know that Composely is doing things to, as the content operations paradigm shifts in 2024, y'all are ahead of the curve. And I appreciate that. And I really thank you. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for hosting these every week and staying, every other week, and staying so diligent with it. There's always just such great insights. And I think right now that's what we all need. So thank you for hosting and thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, how can they get in touch with you? And then for me, book a demo.
Please.
If you haven't had your site analyzed with MarketMuse and you're listening to these, I don't know really what you're doing. So please book a demo if you're listening to these. And I will tell you what to write. Okay. Or maybe not me, but somebody will. But how can they get in touch with you, Nicole?
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole at Composely, NICOLE at COMPOL. It's there. Just Nicole at compose.ly. Wow.
Yes.
I clearly am not a speller. Writer who's far off, I think. We also have some end of year promotions and some sign-on bonuses. We've known it's been a tough year in looking at resourcing. So if you are looking for a content partner, now is a great time to start that conversation. We'd love to chat with you. So just shoot me a message and say demo, and I'll get you connected with the right people.
Beautiful. And thanks again. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.